At 3:12:46 local time, the tactical display aboard the U.S. aircraft carrier lit up with 5 sudden course changes at once. 5 gray contacts, spread across the dark water like scattered knives, all turning toward the same point. Toward the carrier, not drifting, not shadowing, turning with purpose. On the bridge, nobody spoke for nearly 3 seconds, because everybody understood what that meant. In the middle of the night, in one of the most tense stretches of ocean on Earth, 5 warships had just stopped watching the carrier strike group and started moving on it. The sea was black and restless in the Philippine Sea, east of the Luzon Strait, where warm air sat heavy over the water and radar clutter danced at the edge of every screen. The carrier was the centerpiece of a strike group built for deterrence and war. A floating airfield with nearly 100,000 tons of steel driving through contested waters. Around her moved the Shield, guided missile destroyers with Aegis combat systems, a cruiser controlling the outer air battle, helicopters orbiting in the darkness, and somewhere beyond sight, deeper than any mast or radar could see, an American attack submarine keeping its own silent watch. Overhead, an E-2D Hawkeye carved circles through the night, its rotating radar dish searching hundreds of miles in every direction. Everything was normal, tense but normal, until 3:12:46. The 5 surface contacts had been parallel tracking the American formation for hours. Foreign naval vessels, heavily armed. Their profiles suggested destroyers and frigates, hulls built for anti-ship missiles, air defense, and intimidation. Earlier, they had kept a measured distance, pacing the carrier at the edge of caution, playing the familiar game of presence and pressure. It was the kind of encounter sailors trained for and diplomats denied in public. But now the geometry had changed. Every course line on the screen bent inward. The closest projected intercept in less than 20 minutes. Within moments, the situation spiraled out of control. The carrier's bridge requested confirmation. Combat confirmed it. CIC recomputed bearing, speed, closest point of approach. No mistakes, no sensor error, no merchant traffic confusion. 5 warships were converging from the carrier's port, quarter, and bow, spreading out just enough to complicate maneuvering, just enough to threaten flight operations, just enough to force a decision. It was not yet an attack. That was the problem. It was something worse, ambiguity. Out on the flight deck, crews in colored jerseys froze beside aircraft spotted for the morning cycle. Hornets sat chained to steel, armed but silent. An EA-18G Growler waited under deck-edge lights. The catapults were ready. The ship only needed the order to start launching. But a carrier is powerful because it is deliberate. And deliberate decisions are hardest when the enemy stays just below the threshold of open war. The admiral aboard the carrier had seen this tactic before, not in exactly this form, not with 5 ships. But the theory was old. Compress the water around the carrier, force the Americans to turn, disrupt the launch window, push escorts out of position, create confusion, let politics do the rest. One reckless maneuver, one warning shot, one collision in darkness. That was all it would take. After that, nobody would control the story. What no one expected happened next would be the phrase reporters used later. But in that moment, nobody expected anything. They were too busy calculating how quickly bad decisions could become history. At 3:15, the lead foreign destroyer increased speed, then another, then a third. Their wakes widened under moonlight. On the E-2D scope, the 5 contacts were no longer just converging. They were shaping lanes. One aimed toward the carrier's forward arc, 2 pressed toward the escort, screening her flank. Another drifted aft, threatening to pinch the formation into a turning trap. It was aggressive, disciplined, almost rehearsed. The American response, began in silence. One destroyer slid outward to thicken the screen. Warships, another accelerated to hold a missile defense station. The cruiser adjusted bearing to keep the surface picture clean. On the carrier, the order came to man close-in weapons and prepare electronic countermeasures. Far below the waterline, steam turbines drove the giant ship faster, but speed alone would not solve the problem. A carrier can dominate oceans. It cannot ignore the rules of physics. It needs sea room. And right now, sea room was being taken away 1 minute at a time. Then came the second warning. Electronic support operators detected intermittent targeting radar spikes, brief, incomplete, but real. Not enough to confirm an imminent missile shot, yet enough to make every pulse on the scope feel like a countdown. The enemy ships were not just approaching. They were testing reactions, pinging the edge of intent, measuring how close they could come before someone flinched. In the blink of an eye, everything changed. The Hawkeye called a low, fast airborne track skimming above the ocean, well beyond the 5 warships. At first it looked like clutter. Then it split. 1 track became 3, 3 became 6. The altitude was wrong for aircraft. The speed was unstable. Too fast for helicopters. Too erratic for civilian traffic. Drones, someone said. Maybe decoys. Maybe something worse. They were emerging from the darkness west of the converging ships, racing at sea-skimming altitude toward the entire cluster of vessels. Suddenly, the question was no longer whether the 5 warships intended to threaten the carrier. Suddenly, the question was who had just launched something into the middle of both fleets. The CIC went cold with focus. 6 incoming tracks, then 8. The Hawkeye updated vectors. They were not heading only for the Americans. Their geometry cut across the entire surface picture. If this was a deliberate attack, it was designed for maximum confusion, maximum misidentification, maximum chance that one navy would blame the other before the smoke even cleared. On the bridge, the admiral faced the decision every commander fears. If he treated the 5 warships as attackers and engaged, he could ignite a regional war on incomplete information. If he waited too long, the incoming tracks could slam into the carrier group before escorts could respond. There were seconds to choose and no perfect option left. The first FA-18S were launched into darkness, with afterburners tearing the night open behind them. Deck crews vanished into heat shimmer and shadow as another jet shot down the catapult. Growlers followed to jam, confuse, and blind. On the escorts, Aegis operators assigned tracks, weapons officers checked doctrine, and missile cells waited below armored hatches for the command that could redraw the map. But the 5 warships kept coming. That was the part nobody could ignore. Even with unknown inbound tracks approaching from the west, those ships did not immediately break away. They continued closing on the carrier, now only minutes from dangerously close maneuvering range. Whether they misunderstood the threat, suspected a U.S. ploy, or simply refused to yield, the result was the same. 2 crises were now stacked on top of each other. Surface confrontation, possible missile or drone attack. The one mistake would fuse them into one catastrophe. Within moments, the situation spiraled out of control. The nearest foreign destroyer swung hard across the projected path of an American escort, forcing both ships into emergency maneuvering calculations. A collision alarm sounded aboard the U.S. destroyer. Seawater blasted white under its bow as the helm bit into a turn. Another foreign frigate lit its fire control radar for 3 long seconds, long enough to trigger every instinct in the room. Long enough to convince several men that war had already started. Then the sky erupted. One of the inbound tracks dropped lower, streaking over the water like a spark skipping across black glass. A U.S. destroyer fired first, not at the 5 warships, but at the incoming contact. An interceptor vaulted upward, vanished into darkness, and seconds later, a bloom of fire ripped open the horizon. The explosion lit the sea in orange for a heartbeat. Then another track came through, and another. What no one expected happened next. One of the foreign warships opened fire too. Its close-in weapon system began hammering the night. A stream of tracers clawing upward at a target racing between the two formations. For one disorienting instant, both sides were shooting into the same sky. American destroyers launched more interceptors. A foreign frigate turned broadside and loosed decoys. Radar emissions from both navies spiked so violently that operators struggled to separate threat from reaction. The carrier launched another pair of fighters. The Hawkeye called corrections. Over encrypted circuits, American controllers shouted bearing and altitude. Across the water, these foreign ships maneuvered wildly, no longer in a clean convergence, but in survival turns. The third incoming object got through the outer layer. It wasn't a missile. It was a one-way attack drone, fast and low, packed with enough explosives to gut a ship above the waterline. It screamed between two surface combatants and detonated short of the carrier after an escort's guns shredded it at the last second. The blast slammed spray across the hull. On the flight deck, sailors hit the steel. Below deck, damage control teams rushed to stations even though no direct hit had landed. For a few terrible seconds, everyone thought there had been impact. There hadn't, not yet. But the turning point had arrived. The American attack submarine, silent until then, transmitted its contact report. A fast diesel-electric submarine had been detected west of the formation hours earlier, hugging thermal layers, too carefully placed to be coincidence. It was not aligned with the 5 warships. It was not aligned with the U.S. screen. It was positioned for something else entirely. A third actor. A hidden predator waiting for both sides to close. Someone had wanted these fleets compressed together before the real strike began. That changed everything. The Admiral saw it instantly. The 5 warships had not all turned toward the carrier at the same moment because they had committed to an attack. Some had likely reacted to fragments of the same underwater or airborne threat picture the Americans were only now piecing together. Others may have been executing an intimidation maneuver and stumbled straight into a trap laid by someone else. Either way, the ocean had become a kill box, and every ship in it had been herded there. In the blink of an eye, everything changed. The American response shifted from confrontation to domination. The carrier turned into the wind and surged. Fighters climbed and swept west. A destroyer vectored helicopters to prosecute the submarine contact. Another pushed forward, placing itself between the carrier and the densest threat axis. Electronic warfare aircraft flooded the battle space with jamming. Sonobuoys splashed into the sea like scattered coins. Then came a dull underwater concussion far off the port side. Not a torpedo hit, a warning engagement. Somewhere below the surface, Hunter and Hunted had found each other. The 5 warships finally broke formation. One peeled away south, another cut east at flank speed. The closest destroyer turned so sharply that spray erupted over its forecastle. Whatever intentions had existed before, they were gone now. Every captain on every bridge understood the same brutal truth. Stay clustered here, and somebody else would write the ending. But the night had one more shock left. A final low track emerged from the west, faster than the drones, steadier, colder. This one had the signature of a true anti-ship missile. The Hawkeye called it. Aegis locked it. The carrier's escorts engaged. First interceptor missed. Second interceptor broke it apart less than 10 miles from the outer screen. Fragments rained into the sea, and for a moment after the explosion, there was nothing. No new tracks, no new launches, just roaring static, hard breathing over circuits. and the sound of ships cutting water as fast as steel could move. Then, the silence returned. By dawn, the ocean looked almost innocent. Sunlight spread over an emptying horizon, catching nothing but wakes and distance. The 5 foreign warships had withdrawn beyond visual range. The American strike group remained intact. Fighters recovered aboard the carrier one by one, tires chirping against the deck, as if this had been any other morning. Official statements would later call it an unsafe maritime encounter. Defensive actions, routine operations, professional seamanship, the usual language for nights that nearly become wars. But that wasn't the real story. The real story was that 5 warships had changed course toward a U.S. carrier at exactly the wrong moment in exactly the right place. The real story was that somebody in the shadows had counted on fear, speed, and bad assumptions to do the rest. Nearly succeeded too. Had one American destroyer fired at a surface contact instead of the inbound threat? Had one foreign captain mistaken an interceptor launch for a preemptive strike? Had one missile fragment landed on the wrong deck? The world might have woken up to headlines about the first naval battle between major powers in a generation. Instead, it woke up to ambiguity. And ambiguity is often more dangerous than war because it leaves everyone armed, angry, and unconvinced. Somewhere under that same ocean, perhaps days later, perhaps even that same morning, a submarine slipped away in silence. Somewhere in a command center far from the sea, someone reviewed the radar tracks, the launch timings, in the converging courses, and the brief, almost perfect moment when 2 rival fleets were one trigger pull away from destroying each other. Maybe it was a test. Maybe it was a provocation. Maybe it was the opening move of a doctrine the world still doesn't understand. What no one aboard that carrier forgot was the timing, not the noise, not the fire, not the near miss, the timing. 5 ships turning at once, 6 airborne tracks appearing from darkness, 1 hidden submarine waiting below. It was too precise to be random, too chaotic to be accidental, too deniable to be answered cleanly. And that is what makes this story so chilling. Because the next time 5 warships suddenly change course toward a U.S. carrier, the crews on those bridges will remember this night. They will remember how close restraint came to failure. They will remember that the deadliest weapon in modern naval warfare may not be the missile, or the torpedo, or the stealth submarine hidden below the waves. It may be uncertainty itself.